between. Phil will give his talk, he'll do a Q&A, and then he's going to sign books. So the trick is to get to the middle of the store to do that. There's a nice table, it's all set up. But everyone wants to tell him how great he is. So we solved this problem. The books are in between. So I'm going to help him judge you guys, but also the books are in between. So you'll go to the counter first and give him a chance to set up over there. That's all the boring stuff out of the way. My name's Rosie. I'm a co-owner here at Readers Books. I'm so happy to see all of you here celebrating the Odyssey. I was thinking about it this morning and I was like, wow, when did I first read the Odyssey? And I honestly couldn't remember. And then I thought, I think actually I read things talking about the Odyssey first. I think I came into knowing about the Odyssey from reading young adult books set in ancient Greece. Or I came into it because I read Tennyson poetry. You know, there's this thread that goes through anything you read has something to do with something else that happens, and you're just digging backwards until you can find the root of it, and it's usually Shakespeare, Milton, or the Odyssey. And that brings home how important it is. And when we're watching all these film stars dressing up in admittedly great clothing, you have to also think how long have we been telling these stories, and how much can we still learn from them, and it turns out almost everything. So if you guys can give Phil a huge round of applause.
Wonderful turnout. I'm sure it's 75% because of the big hullabaloo around Christopher Nolan's movie. I like to think some of you read some of my previous books and you remember me and you come out and you didn't have anything better to do tonight. And the Giants are in last place, so I watched them. The only World Cup game was played earlier this afternoon. So what else is there to do? Go and talk and read about books. Right? Who here loves books? Who here? Joe and I were just at ALA, American Library Association meeting in Chicago with 6,000 librarians.
Wow.
They are the guardians of freedom of expression in this country. It was so wonderful to be around them. So in the service of that, and an echo of that, I want to begin in a curious way with one of my favorite authors, James Baldwin, who actually said in an interview with Life magazine in 1962, where I'm setting my next book, Waiting for K-Line, about baseball growing up in Detroit. Okay, Jim. We grew up with Jim, so he didn't use that. He was asked about the role of books, the role of reading in our time. And this is a very close paraphrase, but he says, just when you think you are all alone in your troubles and in your heartache, comma, one of the great commas in this country, then you read. You feel that? I felt you feeling it. Something. It's been the role of books and art for millennia, as we will try to explore tonight, that you listen to a story that makes you feel at least slightly less alone in this world. Along that vein, some of you know that I worked with the great Joe Campbell for 8 years. My wife Jo is here somewhere, and she was my publicist for the hero's journey. That's how we began our Odyssey together. We'll keep going back to that phrase. And one night with Joe, and we were filming the hero's journey, I asked him, what if a book, a story, doesn't quite work for you? People have been telling me about how important In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust is, and you dive into it, you spend $100 for those 7 volumes, and you just don't get it. Or you read an Irish fairy tale, and it just doesn't quite fit. So I was asking him, Joseph, just keep reading until you find the book, the story that fits the shape of your soul. Does that feel right? Does that feel right? That's where we're going with this material. So with that in mind, this happens in almost all of my books. I think I'm done. I've ravaged all the libraries that I can. I reread a lot of the books I inherited from my parents, and some of you knew my parents. And then hand in the manuscript, and no sooner do they say no more changes, no more edits. We're sending this to Hong Kong to be printed. Within an hour, I will find something that will make me wince. This is what I found after finally sending the book in after 4 passes, 4 edits to make sure all my citations are right about the Odyssey. Of all people, Bob Dylan. You didn't see that coming, did you? In his 2016 Nobel Prize for Literature speech, which he gave a year after the actual award, because remember, he kind of boycotted it. He said, I'm gigging. I'm too busy to go to Stockholm. But then he wrote a very, very beautiful Nobel Acceptance Prize speech. And in there, he wrote a few lines. I want to get this right. I want to get the cadence right. So that you know this is not going to be a stuffy presentation about fusty, a great word we should bring back, fusty old books and stories. Dylan says, in the middle of his Nobel Prize speech, Odysseus is a traveling man. That's the beginning of the song. Isn't that wonderful? Odysseus is a traveling man, but he's making a lot of stops along the way. He changes identity. He's exhausted. He falls asleep. He's been gone 20 years. A hard road to travel. In some ways, these things have happened to you. Isn't that beautiful? You get right to the gist. No, we have movie experts in the audience. That's part of the genius of great storytelling in poetry, in literature, in the movies. Can you identify? Can you write a character that other people can identify with and see a bit, at least an aspect of themselves somewhere in there? The Greeks called this mimesis. That's where we get the whole notion of the mime, who can copy you, every facial expression and so on. And it was one of the secrets, Tara, you probably know all about this. It's one of the secrets of art. Can you write, film, paint, even a Van Gogh self-portrait? Can you paint something which someone else identifies? This is getting us then closer to the mystery of my book. Who's got a copy of my book somewhere here? Okay, well, right, thank you. So, as a way in, again, we were just in Chicago, so I went back to the Chicago Art Institute. You know, there was these glorious 6 panels of Chagall's painting, and underneath there's a caption in which he says, I paint in order to be surprised. That's at the heart of art. If I know what I want to say already, why bother? There's something in me that has already done it, and my soul, my creative imagination will actually recoil and resist. But if you keep that element of surprise along, you can keep going to surprise and delight. That's a good verb too, to delight yourself. So I'm finishing up the book, and some of you might remember there are all these guest stars in Stephen Colbert's last week of his show. The second to last show, he had Christopher Nolan on. Yeah. And if you know anything about talk shows and the way the time is divvied up, you're lucky to get 3, 4, 5 minutes on a great talk show. Colbert gave him 21 minutes. Wow. 21 minutes to talk about the Odyssey, the director of the upcoming movie on the Odyssey. And then, because I've had my own show on PBS and so on, I know a little bit about interviewing techniques, so it surprised me that Colbert waited until the end of the show to ask the question that I would have asked first as an interviewer, and I'm often asked first, when did you come up with the idea? Yeah. I've just been on NPR, BBC, all this. When did you come up with the idea? And Christopher Nolan says something that wasn't just delightful and surprising, but vindicating for someone like me. He said, never had a dog when I was a kid. And when my wife and I raised our 3 kids, we didn't have time to buy them a dog. So we never had a dog. 2 years ago, I finally bought a dog. And the first time I held the dog, we have our son back here. The first time I held the dog, I thought of the great scene in the Odyssey when Odysseus is coming home after 20 years. And he walks with Eumaeus, the gentle shepherd, one of the great emblems really of friendship in all of Western literature. And as you know, if you remember, we'll get into this, walks up to the twisted staircase there at the Citadel Palace. And there is his daughter waiting for him after 20 years. And Nolan said, I thought of that scene, and that was the moment I decided I had to do the movie.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that something? And it was wonderful. It's a great story. Now, it's also a huge vindication because this, again, going back to Joe, we're talking about art and then mythic art as opposed to ordinary art or illustrative art or commercial art. And this is Joe Campbell was saying to me, you know the hallmark of great art is that it's inexhaustible. You don't listen to Beethoven's Ode to Joy once and say, never need to hear that again. Or you go all the way to Amsterdam and you see a mirror, a woman reading a letter, a woman in the window reading a letter. I saw one from there, never have to see another one, never have to go back to a museum. The great, great art reveals something about you and the world differently every time you encounter it. So, this is an inexhaustible story. 3,000 years we've been telling this story. Homer wrote it about 2,700 years ago. And there are, as I say, the poet known as Homer, to keep the scholars calm. Let's put it that way. So there are many, many entry points. There are many different ways to talk about this book. And I've got 4 months to write this book, a 270-page book. And I'm wrestling, how do I get in? How do I get in? There's an entry, there's a portal. Once you know it, it seems so obvious. Why did it take me days or weeks or months? Navigation, war, there's the whole aspect of PTSD. I am making a strong case here that Odysseus is a deeply wounded warrior. If you know anything about the Aegean and the Mediterranean, if you are on the oars of a ship, it would take you 6 weeks to row from Troy on the west coast of Turkey to Ithaca. But it takes you 10 minutes. It feels like a New Yorker. Did you hear about the guy who took 10 years to row home? But no, there's a whole business about him having to heal himself before he gets home again. There are all of these magnificent entry points. But in the end, possibly because we've gotten into recently our own Argus, what came to me in a flash was it. There she is in there. We'll bring her up for her little bow later. What I decided to do, because I believe that this isn't just in a braided version of history. Some people will look at all of the myths as kind of shadows of history. Or it's not just pre-philosophy, it's so many things. I believe strongly it's about love. Love is what pulls Odysseus home after 10 years. It's the love of his wife Penelope, as we know, the life of his unmet son when he leaves home. The boy, Telemachus, is only an infant. He doesn't even know the boy's alive, nevertheless 20 years old and waiting for him. It's the love of his parents, and it's the love of land. He misses Ithaca. So one of the phrases I play with in here, some of you might remember the mystical aphorism from the Middle Ages, all the way to paradise is paradise. Do you remember that? It's a beautiful line. It's about the spiritual life.
Yeah.
So I play with that in here to say, all the way to Ithaca is Ithaca. Every decision this guy makes after the fall of Troy, 10 years of savage warfare, are couched, steeped, rooted in the way he was raised as a boy and a young man on Ithaca. So this is a ferocious, tenacious desire to get home again. That's the origin. So many scholars agree, they don't agree about much about Homer, but this is one of the things. It was probably titled The Return at the very beginning. So some of you might remember a movie that came out a couple of years ago with Ralph Fiennes playing Odysseus and Juliette Binoche playing Penelope. It takes place at the last, the denouement, the outcome of the book. It's very dark. It's a very different version, I think, than what we're going to get from Nolan. So that's one aspect of it. What I decided was something that I trusted because I came up with this waking up. Because I was writing 15 to 20 hours for almost 5 months to finish it. I barely slept. I was in reverie the entire time. And one morning I just woke up and I remembered being on itself about 10 years ago and walking up this twisted goat path up to the citadel, which is called the Palace of Homer, rather than Odysseus. No, that's the name the epitaphs have given him. And I am approaching the citadel and just feeling this, you know, the thrill of recognition when you finally see a painting that you've seen since you were a young girl, and now you're there at the Met, and there's the painting. Or you see a scene in a movie that you've dreamt about, fantasized about. Or maybe you're in Liverpool, and you grew up loving the Beatles, and now I'm walking on the streets of Liverpool where Paul McCartney and John Lennon. The thrill of recognition is what I felt at that moment. Because I'm looking at this staircase that had been twisted by earthquakes over millennia. And my wife Jo here and Junie in the back, they both have been on that staircase. When I first saw it, my mind went to the moment with Odysseus and Argus, the dog that has been waiting for him for 20 years. This is the book I read with my parents. And there's a funny story. Yeah, there's just one of those. You know, that's Greek. That's the origin of aesthetics, by the way. Aesthetics is what? It's the study of beauty. And it comes from the Greek word aesthesis, which means the constricting of the lungs. So I have extrapolated on that in my book on the Venus de Milo, my book on Sisyphus, and this book. If you don't feel the gasp, if that movie, if that story does not take your breath away, it can be entertainment, but it ain't art. The real thing will take your breath away. That's what happened to me. On the out that staircase. I thought of my parents. The funny setup for that, Jim knew my parents. Bonnie here knew my parents. I'm maybe 10 years old. We have a 6-foot-high Philco black and white television. Anybody remember those? And it went on the fritz. Remember that wonderful old word? It went on the fritz. And my dad tried for 10 minutes, tried to fix it, couldn't. He said, Phil, come with me. We dragged the television through the living room, through the kitchen, to the foot of the stairs, and he kicked it down the staircase into the basement, turned around with hands on his hips, akimbo, another great word, right? And said, now we're going to read together as a family. For the next 3 years, we read the classics, a page apiece. That's how deeply these stories can get into you. And I think that was the atmosphere for Homer, or the poet known as Homer, when he began spinning these tales to give us what we have now. It's a long argument where there are a band of bandits. We know there were bards that were performing not just in the palaces and citadels, but also at all the athletic competitions. I wrote a book on the history of the Olympics years ago, and that was a great discovery for me. That when if somebody in the audience, doctor, you know the book. Okay, great. Alongside the athletic competitions or art competitions. So all the great plays from Greece you have ever seen, either in a theater or in a movie, were inaugurated, were premiered at an Olympics event. So these stories, I'm making the argument for, would have begun about 3,000 years ago, roughly. I'm going to take notes on this. 1250 BC, around that time, the Trojan War, roughly 1150, 1175. So the stories began. The stories began. And as someone who's grown up on stories, from the myths, as you know, the Greek myths to baseball and everything in between, a lot of Motown stories in there. You know how stories are shaped in our own families, but also in pop culture. I think Sherlock Holmes now has the distinction of having the most movies made. I think it's about 290 different renditions of Sherlock Holmes. Every generation is having a take.
Yeah.
They're having an attempt. How can we tell this story about the infallible mind so that another generation can appreciate it? Did you know when Francis Ford Coppola came up with Apocalypse Now, which is based on Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which is based on the Odyssey?
Oh.
Yeah, that's what's underneath all of these. He's trying to finish his movies like trying to crawl up a pane of glass by my fingernails. How about that for an image? And he couldn't decide. And he and his wife then decided, let's have 4 different endings. And we're going to show one in Seattle, one in New York, one in Miami, and one in Los Angeles. There were 4 different endings to Apocalypse Now. Before they took all the measurements and had interviews with, took polls with the people who saw the movies, before they finally decided on the one that we have now. So you see the process is unfolding here. I'm making the case in my book that to find the wisdom, which I describe, not defined, but I describe as, it's the gleaning of meaning. What the hell did you learn from something? What did you learn from your relationship, your friendship, a journey, an encounter with a doctor? What did you learn? That's the wisdom. And I think people have been learning from this story. For millennia. The question is what? What have we been learning? Because there's always some bad that comes with the good, right? I think it's a story about love, the way that love draws his hero home after being savaged by war. It's also a story about healing yourself and not waiting for the world to heal you. Remember when Odysseus becomes Ulysses in Italian mythology? You know who's responsible for that? It was Virgil. When Virgil wrote the Aeneid, what he heard in his Italian ear, so to speak, was something like Ulysses. So it's what he heard became Ulysses. But in Latin, it means healed scar. That tells you everything you need to know, I'm speaking figuratively, about the Odyssey. This is a story about a man who's been not just in Vietnam for 2 months, in Afghanistan for 4 months, he's been at Troy for 10 years. He's been savaged by war. He just didn't encounter it, and he didn't have all the answers. He went berserk. The Greeks have their own word for this. You can see it in the book. He went mad. And when you go mad at war, you pay a deep, deep price. And as you know, if you don't find a way to heal yourself, when you arrive home, the people around you will pay the price for the wound that you haven't been dealing with. So 10 years is what it takes for him to earn the right to get home again, so that he's recognizable and not just a monster who's returning from war. Which is why I've been working for years now with a fellow named Dr. Ed Tick, who deals with PTSD, post-traumatic stress. And he used to take soldiers back to the battlefield where they were traumatized. So a Vietnam soldier might go to a village that he napalmed in 1969. Or someone who fought in Afghanistan, you might take 4 or 5 soldiers back to a place where they lost 50 of their friends. So that's been one way to deal with trauma, which is Greek, by the way, for wound. Trauma is an old Greek word. But in this, I think Homer is writing the first book on healing, self-healing. The first book that deals with wounds, in which he has to heal himself. It's a break between the total reliance on the gods, or, well, the gods. In this case, he has to find a way to heal himself. So I'm guessing, I haven't seen it yet, but Joe and I and our son Jack, we have tickets for next Thursdays to see the Nolan movie. And let me just guess for a second. I'm guessing, like most of the other movies, Kirk Douglas, and anybody remember the 1956 movie with Kirk Douglas? We saw it. I think the Quo Vadis Theater in Detroit. This is a very good last movie. And then I just found out last night, Jordan Milius, some people know here, is one of the very first French filmmakers in 1892. He did a 4-minute version of the Odyssey, with only two brief scenes, Calypso and the Cyclops. So we've been trying to tell the story to the heart of it. Most of the renditions on radio, on stage, on television, animated, many animated versions of this, tend to focus on the middle four books of 9 through 12. And I think the reason is fascinating to me. Homer is also the first filmmaker. He's the first sports writer. He's the first writer to write. He writes about athletic competitions in the Iliad and the Odyssey. He's the first sports writer. He's the first travel writer. I was just on the Arthur Frommer show because I pitched the Odyssey as the world's first travel book. And he did. You'll do anything to get on the radio, right? So with this, I think what begins to happen here has an echo in fairy tales. A myth, again, this is kind of mythology or folklore 101. A myth, a fairy tale is a story about metamorphosis or change. How young people, a young boy becomes a man, a young girl becomes a woman. It describes the change in youth and the agony it often takes to become an adult. Myths are stories about the second half of life. And they're focused not as much on happiness. There will be a happy wedding at the end. There will be you'll find some love. You'll find an animal that loves you, whatever it might be. The myth tends to be tragic. It's a constant reminder of the sorrow at the heart of life, which is why I finished my introduction here, again with a surprising way, and then I'll read a little bit. I was in San Francisco's great blues rooms. John Lennon went to his Boom Boom Room, which is out near Berkeley Park. Right, I used to live out there. And John Lennon was playing that night. So that was really cool to hear him boom, 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 da 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 boom, right? And someone during one of the breaks shouts out from the back of the room, John Lee, what are the blues? And John Lee was in the habit of talking about himself in the third person, which is very charming. He said, well, John Lee always hears this question. So when John Lee hears this question about the origin of blues, you know what John Lee tells him? John Lee says, this is kind of circulating, it's a really wonderful rhythm. He said, John, blues ain't nothing more than 3 minutes of triumph over sorrow. In some way, that's one of the functions of art. And I think it's one of the functions of storytelling. When Homer leaves home as a young boy, he's only about a one-day horse ride from the ruins of Troy. Troy was already mythological when Homer was growing up on the west coast of Turkey. So he would have heard the story would have been in every tavern, in every port, the sailors, the soldiers, your parents would have been talking about this. My way of putting the story together is he went up to see the ruins of Troy, like Alexander the Great did. Remember that? On his way from Macedonia to India, his first stop to announce to the whole world that his journey, his expedition was going to be mythic, was to stop and touch the spear of Achilles in the ruins of Troy. This is a way of touching the sacred, the numinous. So now Homer goes across to the Peloponnese, and my guess, the way that I'm trying to put the story together, is that he does then, we're talking 650 BC. What many of us are doing now, following in the footsteps of someone we've heard about, read about, we've admired. The entire tourist business, which is now the #1 business in the world, it has overtaken the armaments industry. It's the #1 business in the world. Remember that whole, the prediction in the Old Testament where you should turn swords into plowshares? Figuratively speaking, that's what's happening in our time. And what are we doing? We're following in the footsteps of mythological characters. Famous political leaders, scientists, literary heroes, sports heroes. There are pilgrimages every day to Pele's where Pele, the football player, grew up in Brazil. I think that's what he was doing already. He was going to the sites in Marseille, in Epidorus, in Corinth, ultimately to Ithaca. So having spent a lot of time in Ithaca, it's really been fun to ask people, young people, older people, when did you first hear the story? When was ever here? It's wonderful to get these people just struck. They'll throw their shoulders back. Oh, Omeros, they call him Omeros there. Oh, we are so proud. We think Omeros was here 4 times. And that he went up. And as he's, I'm guessing as a travel writer, sometimes travel writer, but also as a filmmaker, I mean, worked on 50 films, but you go to these places and you see them with your own eyes. And then if you are a writer at heart, you need to put the story into your own words. Does that make sense? We all do that in some way. But the beauty of this version, and we're all still extrapolating, believe me on this, the story that you can do with other countries, let's say, if anybody brought the translation I'm reading now, this is the version I took to Ithaca the first time. This is the E.V. Root prose edition. And it's significant for me in many ways because it's all, this one is all about story. And other people will look at this and say it's about verse, meter, rhyme, and there's these wonderful metaphors that the heroic pentameter, the dactylic pentameter that on the works, it's supposed to be an echo of the sound of the oars in the water in the Greek warships. If you've been at sea, if you've been on any of the ships, and you've read Homer, it's right. And it's a gorgeous kind of symmetry of art mimicking life, the rhythms and beauties of life. But you can also get stuck in the weeds there and forget that's a story. I always think of that moment in All the President's Men, when Woodward and Bernstein, remember the movie, when they bring their notes about Watergate, and they throw the notes down on the desk of Jason Robards, playing the editor of the Washington Post. And remember, he picks his feet up on the desk, takes a toke of his stogie, looks at it, and he looks up at Redford and Hoffman, right, in the movie. Look at, yeah, but where's the effing story? I heard that phrase every day while working on my version of the book, because it's the story of someone trying to get home again. I think has been universal for the last 3,000 years. Figuratively speaking, in the world of immigrants, in the world of constant warfare, a world of plague and disease. Around Homer's time, the average life expectancy was somewhere between 30 and 35.
Jeez.
Everyone would have been at war constantly. And I like to think of the Iliad and the Odyssey as a way of reflecting this state of constant insecurity about life, about war, the consequences of war, sometimes the complete destruction of your city and your home, razed to the ground. This was a common technique in those years. And so the audiences that Homer would have addressed, I think, were trying to make sense of this. You help us sing a song. They would bring the bards into the palaces and sing us a song. And the most popular song was called the Trojan Cycle. Stories that begin with the enchantment of Aphrodite bringing the young Prince Paris and Helen together. And it gives us an early indication of how love and war have been inextricably connected ever since. So the last aspect of this, before I read just a few pages from my introduction and then open it up for questions, is this. What surprised me was reading the Rue rendition again, and then the Emily Wilson translation, which is wonderful. It's brisk, it's modern, it's sassy, it's feisty. She pays more attention to the female characters than any man has done before, but it also loses 1/3 of the book, because she shortens it so much to make it gallop, to make it move quickly. So there's a choice. You can get through it much faster than the Lattimore translation of the others. Something. So what are you looking for? What are you looking for? This one always meant a lot to me because Rue he translated this while the bombs were falling in London.
Oh, wow.
He was the editor who came up with the entire idea of the Penguin Classics. Have any of you ever bought an edition of the Penguin Classics? Metamorphosis, Gilgamesh, the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, all of them. That was his idea. And it came to him, as it often does, in moments of crisis, in moments of war, when it feels like Armageddon is around the corner. And how do you deal with that kind of crisis when the world is on fire? You go back to art. Art is the healing force. Storytelling is the healing force. So this helped me, and I give you just a few of those choices. Because here, reading the Rue, while I was trying to get my way in to resolve the book, bring it home in those last few books, there's a scene, no other scholar I know has talked about this, but when Calypso finally allows him to go, Odysseus, and she asks plaintively in many translations of this, but essentially she's saying, I will make love to you day and night for the rest of eternity. Isn't that enough? I will make you immortal. Ain't that enough? It's not enough. She said, why? I'm immortal. I will give you everything you want and need. You never have to leave. You don't tell any adventurer you never have to leave, right? Where's the challenge in that? But then his response is glorious. It's kind of a tenderizer for your heart. He says, yes, you're beautiful. You're a goddess. You're a wonderful lover. All this, but you aren't Penelope. Doesn't that make you gasp? But you're not Penelope. That gives you this whole other side of the martial vision that Homer is usually practical. These are only stories about testosterone cases from 2,700 years ago, right? No, it's about the redemptive power of love. He goes back because he misses her. And when they finally return, I got my ending. I was rereading after this scene. Well, I could see how no one deals with this. It's called the slaughter or the destruction of the suitors. It's still a controversial scene. Was that necessary? Was the bloodbath necessary? The catharsis, which deeply inspired Aristotle's theories on drama later. Did the story need this? After the bloodbath, there was a great, what they call a recognition scene. They hadn't seen each other for 20 years. And so if you love drama, this is quite something where they're testing each other back and forth. Are you who you say you are? You could be an imposter. I've got a lot of men coming to my palace here saying that they are Odysseus, and the only reason you don't recognize me is because I've aged for 20 years. They've been playing with it for years. They finally accept each other. And as Lattimore says, and they finally went to bed together, and they had their share of joy. Wonderful phrase. You don't need all the limbs entangled and all of that red hot rhetoric. They have their share of joy. But for me, it's a setup for what comes next. In the translation, it goes back to the 1870s. It's the one that my mentor, Trojan used. Penelope then turns to her husband, whom she hasn't seen for 20 years, and says, come tell me of thine ordeal, for my heart can bear it. I need to know what has happened. And so as most guys would say, yeah, okay, I'll tell you what a great hero I am. And he goes on a bit from there, and he begins to say how long the war was, and how horrible I've lost all my crew, and our fire, but I never forgot you. I never forgot you. He tells a story. But here is the most staggering surprise in the book. Odysseus then turns to her and says, "My Penelope, you tell me what you have endured since I've been away."
That makes him worthy.
That's right. He passed the test. And it shows how Homer is setting him up as equals. Penelope is every bit as cunning, strategic, clever, sexy, all of those as he is. And then, so for some reason, male writers forgot this symmetry for the next 2,000 years. But when you go back to it, we'll have to see how it's filmed, not next by Nolan, because the original translations show a symmetry that is really, really beautiful. And it's love. It's love that's bringing them back together. It's another way of saying something that my friends, doctors who are working with PTSD, wounded soldiers who have been savaged by war, are saying. It's love, it's storytelling. Storytelling is what begins the healing. Can you put what happened to you into a story? In that way, unless you do, you live with an open wound for the rest of your life. Telling the story allows you to grow a scar. Does that feel right? Scar. Okay, can we take a breath now? And let me just take 5 minutes to read just a little bit of the opening of my book, so you get the kind of tremor that I did while I was there. Because I was uncertain about using this opening with my editor, who's worked on thousands of books over the years, and you know the opening is everything. But in the end, you have to trust your gut, right? You have to trust your heart. And so I used the frontispiece here, which my wife Jo helped me find. You see, this is a great moment that's been rendered in so many lithographs, engravings, sculptures, mosaics. There is a mosaic of this on the floor of Pompeii, one of the great villas in Pompeii. So this moment of the devoted dog waiting for you touches the heart in an archetypal, a very beautiful way. So just a couple of pages here, bear with me, and then we'll open it for some questions. It's dusk on rocky, rugged Ithaca, as Homer described it. Sea-girt, widely forested, leaf quivering. The island shimmers with quicksilver light. The deep blue harbor glistens far below. I stumble along a meandering goat path toward the tumble-down ruins of a Mycenaean-era site long rumored to be the palace of Odysseus, Penelope, and Telemachus. The land and sea are staggeringly beautiful, but in Greece, there is always more to the eye than what is visible. There is the invisible, what is known only through the eyes of myth and hope. Every view vibrates with what happened long ago, and with what may have never happened, but was well imagined. Which is one way that I think about myth. These are things that never really happened, but always happen. You read that story, see that movie, you feel it. How did they know what I was feeling 3,000 years ago? How did they possibly know that? My scalp and the soles of my feet are prickling. My breath comes in gasps. My fingers itch for pen and paper. The poem comes alive all around me. Trudging on, I see an ancient staircase twisted by centuries of earthquakes and stripped long ago of most of its marble to build faraway villas. I gaze at the steps that lead up to the stone stubs of the palace gates of one of the great rogues in world literature. Hesitate on the stumbling steps. I stumble, trying to get my foothold on the mossy stones. As I grumble, I am caught by a distant memory. Not just deja vu, but deja lu. L-U. It's a real phrase. The thrill of being in a place you read about long ago. Isn't that wonderful? Deja lu. I know, I've been here before. Oh, that was it. Beautiful. It's one of life's wonderful feelings, isn't it? skipping down a little bit. Suddenly the warrior king forces him to slow down, make him pause. Oh, sorry. According to recent archaeological findings, I am standing on the very spot of one of the most gripping scenes in the imperishable poem. The staircase is where the long-lost hero pauses for an agonizing moment with his loyal friend Eumaeus, the loyal swineherd. Odysseus has finally returned 20 years after leaving home with those 112 black-hulled ships and 600 crew members, and having lost everything. Suddenly, Odysseus sees something that forces him to slow down, make him pause. To the side of the stairs rising to the palace, he encounters Argus.
I didn't do anything.
These stories are immortal, right? They're still happening. All right, go get your trait now. Oh my God. His beloved Argus, his hunting dog, which he got as a young boy. Now he's lying on a dung heap, gasping, near death. Once swift and strong, the hound has been abandoned by the suitors. Every fiber of Odysseus' being wants to stop and greet his faithful dog, but he cannot risk being recognized. The goddess Athena enchanted him by a drifting mist. But her magic wand prevails. So it appears to be an old beggar, protect him from being hurt or even murdered by the suitors. Despite the heart-rending changes Odysseus has suffered in the agony of war and the misery of shipwreck, his noble hound recognizes him by the sound of his voice. Right? The smell of his garments, his footfall on the cobblestones. It is one of the grace notes of the entire poem. The noble Argus knows his master has come home. Sniffs the air, lifts his head, waits to be acknowledged. However, Odysseus does not and cannot stop. His heart aches with the need to greet his beloved dog, but he can't risk it. Seeming before the exact right moment. It's called the perilous, the opportune moment, the sacred moment, as opposed to ordinary time. Out of concern for the survival of himself, but also his wife and his son, his family, he must keep moving. This scene reveals to me one of what the ancient Greek poets called the infinite moments. Have you had those? You feel you have access to your past, the beauty of the present moment, but also the future. The Greeks had a phrase for this, the infinite moment. I think this poem is full of these. There are myriad heart-moving moments in the poem, but the staircase scene with Odysseus' beloved Argus stirs me most. Not only because of the portrayal of devotion, but for the display of Odysseus' eminent self-control. The Greeks have a gorgeous word for this, and it's called sophrosyne. Can you stay calm in a moment of crisis? When people confront you, they may even endanger you. Can you stay cool? We actually value this in acting, in sports. What did we call Joe Montana? Joe Cool. We didn't call him hothead. Steph Curry. Cool. Alec Guinness. Acting. This tremendous sense of being self-centered. That is what is exposed here in the book, and it's at the heart of this. Can he train himself to stop being susceptible to seduction, like with the sirens, with the monsters that he's about to encounter? Right? So I'm setting that up, and let me end with just one little passage here that still means a lot to me. Okay. In the fall of 1994, I had a conversation with mythologist Joseph Campbell in the famous Redwood Room of San Francisco's Clift Hotel. We were working together on The Hero's Journey, a documentary film about his life and work. Over drinks, I asked him what distinguished his teaching and writing about mythology and literature and religion from the other eminent scholars of the day. Without hesitation, Campbell credited his female students at Sarah Lawrence College, where he taught for 38 years, for his personal style. He said, every year they would compliment me on my teaching. He said, you're a genius, Professor Campbell, you're so bright and honored, all this flattery, right? But then Joe said, eventually they would come around and they would ask, what do the myths mean to me? What does Babel possibly mean to me now? The King Arthur legends, the Tolkien stories that were coming out in those years and becoming very, very famous on college campuses everywhere. What does the Odyssey mean to me? What does it mean to the living of a life? That in the end is what inspired the way that I've approached this book, because I suggest that in all 24 books, remember the Odyssey is divided into what the Greeks actually call rhapsodies. The origin of the word rhapsody. The 24 different chapters or books. In every one of these episodes, our hero, as in all drama throughout time, not only in our movies, but also shepherd plays and so on, there is some kind of wisdom to be gleaned. You have to ask, does the hero, the protagonist, the main character, learn something? And if not, does someone else? Because this is the way that we learn how to fashion our own lives. It's in the echo of somebody else's. There's a beautiful line by Linda Gregg, the poet. Some of you know her. Everyone is always trying to get home again. And I think one way you do that is through art. You find the music, the musician, the playwright, the movie, sometimes the sculptor. It's a piece of work that has been created by somebody that did not exist the day before or the year before. And somehow that work of art brings you home again. So I subscribe to this idea that we are born twice. We are born in a physical place, in a physical time. I was born in Fort Jackson, Columbia, South Carolina, because my dad was about to go off to war in Korea. That's my root story. Today, I'm born in another way, probably in Paris, where I went after college, University of Detroit. And that's where I found my voice, which is the origin of vocation. That's where I found my tribe, my destiny. In some ways, I think all these great stories are about helping us determine the difference. As Woody Allen said in Annie Hall, this is now total heaviosity. So wait for this one. The difference between fate and destiny. Art is constantly pursuing this question. Fate is what's given to you by the Greeks. It would have been given to you by the gods. This is you are going to be a warrior. You are going to be a farmer. But great art and literature is saying what you do with what was given to you. Being born in Ithaca, being born in Los Angeles or Kansas City, growing up to play the blues. Your destiny is what you forge with your own hands. And I think Homer is playing this out 2,700 years ago. And it's staggering to me that this, when I began this book, about a year ago, last July, I was thinking, is this going to be as dry as just book? Who's going to read the Odyssey a year from now. And then this movie comes out, and you can't turn on the radio or the TV without getting the recent trailer for the Odyssey. Something has captured the world's imagination, right?
Yeah.
And the question is what? Will he tell, as Bob Dylan was asking us, will he just tell his story, Christopher Nolan's version of the Odyssey? Or will he tell your story? Or your story? Will he tell your story? It's quite an accomplishment. What a slowly does that. There's a reason. Questions, issues, favorite translations, concerns about the movie. Who's been reading it recently?
I
Dr.
have
Adams.
the Harvard, from the Harvard collection.
Uh-huh.
Is that a close translation what you've done?
Is it the Butcher and Lang translation? Does that sound familiar? There's also the Robert Fagles version, the Lattimore version, Emily Wilson. Does anybody else have any favorites up there? Please.
Well, I just finished Emily Wilson. And I want to ask you. But in her version, there's a lot of crying going on. And did you address that at all?
I do. I think it's a surefire symptom of this book being the world's first take on PTSD. He is crying like warriors who haven't quite resolved what happened at war with them. It's shocking unless you've been around people who have survived war. Or war there, it's a very sensitive spot. And it's all, you have to remember too, that he does not know what it is going to look like. There's no internet, there are no telephones, there's no cell phone to pick up. Hey, yeah, is the Starbucks still open next to the palace? He has no idea what's waiting for him. But I think it's part of the catharsis at the Harvard. Apparently it surprised her as well, when she finally went back to translate it. And again, sometimes it depends. If you say Odysseus was crying, it can make him sound like a wuss if you're not careful. But if you say he's weeping, if you say sorrow is constricting his heart, that's a very different take. And she's careful about that. She also is wonderful with a portrayal of Penelope and also with Helen. Because Helen, I read about this in my book on Venus de Milo, how she has been maligned for 2,000 years in history, where she was raped 3 times by the time that Paris came to get her and fall in love with her. They're under a spell of Aphrodite anyway. But you have to understand the context that she's been raped 3 times, even with Menelaus. She was a trophy wife, and she was enchanted when she went away. But especially the medieval translators through Europe always used the worst possible epithet for her. She's a whore. She's a wanton woman. All of the blame goes to Helen, rather than all these men who cannot stop waging war. Right? So, in this sense, Emily Wilson has performed, and Benton Hughes, the great historian, performed tremendous service there. And that brings up a quick point here, then I'll take another 1 or 2 questions. Rather than this being a testosterone-driven book, where our hero, like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Tom Cruise and all the Mission Impossible movies, through sheer dint of will, through violence, through bravery, I am going to conquer the world. Odysseus gets home because of 5 women. 5 female forces. Not his crew, not male gods, not even his own tremendous courage. It's Penelope who's drawing him home. It's Calypso. Nausicaa, the beautiful young princess on Phaeacia, which is now modern Corfu. Kirke, did I forget somebody?
Calypso.
And the thing, who's the patron through all this. And what I think Homer is doing is, this is kind of advanced proto-debt psychology, in which we have been hearing now from Freud and Jung and Adler and Maria Gabutas and others, that in order to heal yourself, to become a complete human being, you better have access to the other side of your psyche. Women have to know how to access male power, and men have to know how to access female emotion, back and forth, back and forth. Who said this 2,750 years ago? It's staggering. His descriptions of women. It reminds me of that passage from Coleridge, the poet Coleridge, who once, in an interview, and he said, every time I've written a new poem, I feel like I've climbed a mountain, I've said something new that the world has never heard before. I get to the top of the fountain, and there's Shakespeare waiting for me. This is sense when you think, oh, my playwrights, my screenwriters, oh, they have said something new about the human race, the human condition. And then you read some of these books, and you see, technology, the outer world has changed constantly every year. Human character, apparently, according to these stories, has not changed. Maybe, do you have time for one more question?
One more, no pressure, it's good.
Terry, please.
Oh, well, just to respond to that first, weeping is such a good sign of healing. It's such a good sign that it's healing. I hope this isn't taking us off. I'm curious about your writing process and what surprised you. Anything about the process or what happened, what synchronicities, or what dreams came while you were in the writing process?
Well, thank you again. It's from one writer and teacher to another. That's a pertinent question. Of course, I've written many, many, many books, TV shows, radio, TV, movies. This was the hardest one to start because I've been with it since I was a kid. I've been leading groups to put in the footsteps of Odysseus and Penelope and Homer for many, many years. But that's not the same thing as writing about it. You, especially if you take on something so daunting as an immortal story, you have to find a way to say something original. Find a new way in. That takes time and courage. Every day, after I got home from Greece last September, and I've just been there on Ithaca, and now, what can I say? It hasn't been said before. It's very intimidating. And the only recourse I can offer other writers, commentators, teachers, scholars, healers, as yourself, is you go into reverie. You cannot force yourself intellectually to get into this. Gaston Bachelard, one of the great French philosophers, once said, you have not fully experienced something until you've gone into reverie over it. Which means to go into the dream world, which isn't intellectual, it's not rational. That comes later when you edit. So for this, I had this discipline for weeks, listening to Greek music, Joe and I eating Greek food at home, rereading in as humble a spirit as possible, commentaries, but also early translations, and then waiting for my way in. It's like a portal will open. Otherwise, I talk to sometimes you hear a click. That's it. I'm going back out. Go back. So you trust that, and it becomes a dreamlike process. So I can tell you about the beginning and the end, hitting send to my publisher, who's been waiting with bated breath for this darn thing, because we had to get it out before the Nolan movie. But I remember almost nothing in between. And in some ways, that is the critical sign. It means you have been in a place beyond time and space. Everything came to me. I had visions of Homer. I had visions of reading with my father. I was there on ships, many ships going back and forth across the Mediterranean. I could smell, sometimes I could smell the sea when I was writing about it. I could taste the food. I remember having this great realization that the first mention of shish kebab, putting your sword through a piece of meat, comes from Homer. The first mentions of cheesecake, the first mention of yogurt. All of this takes place in Homer. So I allow myself to just feel some joy about all these moments, but let that in. let that in, and that's when I know. But I'm writing, 4 hours disappear. And I look down, and sometimes Stella was at my side there. I said, Stella, where was I? Did I leave the room? I think it's a telltale sign. Painters will tell you about this. Musicians will tell you about this. I've had long conversations with Van Morrison, about that. I don't know what happens. I disappear. I go into, in Ireland, they call it Tirnanag. It's the land of the fairies. It's the land, what they call the back of beyond. Isn't that a wonderful way to talk about the creative imagination? Can you allow yourself to be humble enough not to try to push your thinking through it? The thinking, the intellectualization will not get you to the richness alone. Later, you need that. You can't rewrite forever, although Marcel Proust tried. You know, in Milo Kundera, his manuscript for Unbearable Lightness of Being. How can the editor make any sense out of this? At some point, you have to let go. But you let go to what? The muses. I'm sure you all know that the origin of our word museum means house of the muses. We go to a museum to be inspired by one or the other of the 9 muses, who are personifications of inspiration, art, beauty. What makes life worthwhile. So with them, I think we should